I have long said that the major contradiction in modern American conservatism is that conservatives claim both that they are pro-free market and that they are pro-family. I think that these are mutually exclusive positions. In other words, I think that the free market, absent any sort of government redistribution or welfare programs, is fundamentally antithetical to the creation and to the health of families. And I think this for fundamentally two major reasons. The first reason is that a free market by itself distributes money purely based on A, labor, and B, ownership of capital. Because a child does not work or own any capital, a child contributes zero economic resources to their parents. On the other hand, a child costs a significant amount of economic resources to be taken care of. So essentially, you are always going to be far more poor if you have a child than as opposed to if you didn't have a child, because children cost a lot of money to take care of, and they don't earn their parents any money. The second reason is that peak childbearing years, the years in which people, the ages in which people typically have kids and start families, occurs at the exact same time as when most people are earning the least amount of income that they're going to earn throughout their lives. Most people typically tend to have families in their mid to late 20s, and this tends to be the exact same time period in which people are, just getting into the labor market, likely working entry-level jobs, likely haven't gotten many promotions yet, etc. And so the result of this is that absent any sort of government redistributive policies that provides extra income to people who choose to have children, there are two major outcomes. One, countless people decide not to start a family that they would otherwise have liked to start because they're afraid of what's going to result financially from that. And two, people who do go ahead and do have the families that they want to have, many of them are economically devastated and fall into poverty as a result. If you need more empirical evidence of this, the United States has one of the highest levels of child poverty because of all OECD countries, it spends like the least, I'm pretty sure, on child benefits. So if we don't want people to fall into poverty because they had kids, and if we don't want people to be prevented from having kids because of economic anxiety, then we need to have some sort of a program that distributes money to people who have kids, extra money to people who have kids. And then, of course, the question is, how do we do this, right? The United States currently doles out child benefits through a complicated patchwork of different tax credits. We have the earned income tax credit, that's the main one. We have the child tax credit, and we have the additional child tax credit. And the main justification for how this tax credit system works is that it encourages people to join the workforce. It encourages labor force participation. And basically, the reason for that is because the design of these tax credit policies is trapezoidal, meaning they phase in with income. So at the bottom level, at the bottom income brackets, people don't earn any benefits. And then as people earn more and more, the amount of benefits that they increase, the amount of benefits that they receive increases. And then at a certain point, it flatlines. And then again, at a certain level, once they've reached a high enough income, it starts to phase out. And then eventually, if you're rich enough, you're not receiving any benefits. And so the idea is that by requiring people earn a certain level of income in order to receive any benefits, you're going to encourage more people to work. I think that this is a very shaky argument. The main reason is that in order for people to be incentivized by these tax credits to start working and earn an income, people would have to have some in-depth understanding of what these tax credit systems are, how they work, how the benefit phase-ins work, how to maximize how much money they're getting from these tax credit systems in terms of like income brackets, and all of this stuff. Which I think is unrealistic. I do not think that the average American has a good enough understanding of how our current welfare policy works, that expecting them to understand how these systems work and respond to the incentives accordingly is going to hold true for a substantial percentage of the population. And then, of course, we have to look at empirically, right? Does this pan out? So the general empirical justification for the labor force participation thing is that there was an expansion of the earned income tax credit in 1993, and after that, the gap in labor force participation between women with children and women without children massively shrunk as a result. Now, the reason this is significant is because single women with children are the major target demographic of these income tax credits. And so when these credits are expanded, the amount of single women with children significantly goes up, the labor force participation rate among women with children significantly goes up, then that would suggest that these tax credits were successful in their goal of increasing the labor force participation rate. However, there was one study, a recent study from 2018 called Taxation and Labor Force Participation, the Earned Income Tax Credit Considered, by a guy named Clevin. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce his name. And basically, he looked at a variety of expansions of these tax credit systems and tried to see if this correlation held true beyond just this one historical example. And basically what he found is that this is not the case. So for one, he looked at 5 different expansions of the earned income tax credit between 1968 and 2018. And he found that essentially, while the one expansion in 93 did decrease the gap, the other 4 earned income tax credit expansions that he examined during this time period did not lower the gap to any significant degree, which suggests that this did not work, of course. Then the author looked at between 1984 and 2018, examined 28 state-level earned income tax credit supplements, and found that none of them led to an increase in the labor force participation rate of single women with children. Then the author looked at the 1999 expansion of the WTC in the UK, which is essentially the disgusting Brit Bonger version of the earned income tax credit, and found that this expansion also did not lead to an increase in the labor force participation rate. So then the question remains, why did this one expansion in 93 have this impact when none of the other expansions throughout history have had this impact? And so the author analyzed specifically this specific increase. And what he found is that after you control for unemployment and other welfare waivers that were happening at the same time, the impact of the tax credit expansion on the labor force participation rate disappears. So essentially, this one historical example seems to be a spurious correlation and doesn't hold up when you look at a sort of broader time frame. So with that sort of argument for tax credits out of the way, now I'm going to sort of give my brief explanation as to why I don't like the current tax credit system. And there's fundamentally a few reasons for that. The first one is that these tax credits are paid out annually, right? Like you only get the tax credit once a year. And this has fundamentally two problems. The first is that it makes it very hard for families to incorporate this tax credit into a monthly budget. And the second problem with this is that essentially what that means is that your benefit is based on last year's income rather than the current year's income. So imagine you get your tax credit money in January, and so you don't get another one until next January. That's cool, and it's based on your income when you filed your taxes, right? But then imagine in February you lose your job. Well, if you were wealthy in January when you got the benefit, and then you lose your job in February, you don't get any benefits throughout the entire year, and you don't get any benefits until next year, assuming you're still poor, because these benefits are only paid out on an annual basis. The second problem is that because these tax credits are means tested, in other words, how many benefits you receive is dependent on what your income is. That means that when receiving the benefit, and in order to receive the benefit, you have to file out a bunch of forms demonstrating what your income is before you receive it. Meaning that this sort of the burden of all of this paperwork prevents many people from receiving the benefit who are eligible to receive the benefit. And it's a remarkably high number as well. I think the participation rate of people who are eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit is about 78%, meaning 22% of people who are eligible for this program don't receive it because there's so much paperwork involved in the process of receiving it. Another problem is that, one of the main problems is that because the tax credits are phased in, the most poor people in the country do not earn any benefits. So I think the statistics generally bear out that the poorest 9% of children in America receive zero benefits from these tax credit programs. And then the next 11% poorest children in the country receive less than the maximum amount from these child benefits, which is fucking insane. Like imagine designing a benefit that is meant to advantage poor people with kids that leaves out the poorest people who have kids. It's just like, that is unbelievable to me that you would design a program in that way. Another problem is that the tax credit programs, when you factor in tax preparation fees, which many people use when receiving the program, the overhead costs of the program, meaning the amount of money contained within the program that goes to like administrative shit, as opposed to just going to the people it's supposed to help, is 11%. Which is one of the highest overhead costs of any welfare program in the country. So these are just sort of like broadly my main problems with our current tax credit system. I think they have a lot of problems, and I think we should just sort of get rid of this whole way of doing things. Which obviously raises the question, well, then how should we do child benefits? I think the answer to this is rather simple. You just have a monthly check of a certain amount of money, probably in like the mid 300s, go out every month to every person in America for every child that they have. This is a very simple way of doing things. The lack of a phase in means that the poorest people aren't being excluded. The lack of a phase out means that people don't have to demonstrate how much income they're making in order to receive the benefit. So participation rates are going to be higher because there's not as much paperwork involved. This just seems like, and because it's paid out on a monthly basis, this means that you can incorporate it into a monthly budget, and this means that you're not going to have a problem if you started out rich and then, or like making more money and then become start making less money like later in the year. This sort of monthly check, universal monthly check approach to child benefits seems massively superior in every way to this sort of complicated tax credit approach that we've set up in the United States. I think Matt Brunig's proposal, and Matt Brunig is a big influence for me in how I think about this. So if you're interested in learning more, I would suggest looking up Matt Brunig's work on the Family Fun Pack, looking at Matt Brunig's work on the Universal Child Benefit proposal. I think his specific proposal was $374 a month per child. And the reason for that is because $374 a month is exactly the amount that a person with one child would need to be making over someone with no children in order to not fall below the poverty line. So yeah, I guess that's just my general understanding, hopefully, because I believe that what Democrats did in Congress, where there's still a phase out, there's still some paperwork involved, but they did eliminate the phase in. So the poorest people are now receiving money from the tax credit system, and they did it in advance on a monthly basis instead of an annual one, which is obviously not perfect. They haven't resolved all the problems in the tax credit system, but it is a massive improvement over how we've been doing things. So hopefully Democrats are able to make these changes to our current child benefit system permanent. And yeah, I think that's like the main takeaway from this. The other takeaway is whenever you hear Republican, because oh my God, we're going to be hearing this a lot for the next like year or so. We're going to be hearing, oh, you can't do this, it's welfare. Oh, you have to have phase ends to encourage work. Just know every time you hear that, that is a bullshit talking point. It is not empirically grounded, and it is not factually correct. So yeah, that's about all I have on that. Shout out, obligatory shout out to my $10 patrons, that being Alex, Daniel, Benny, Isocratic, Liam the Commie, Hate Corruption, CEO of Market Socialism, and Zero. If you appreciate the stuff that I do and you want to support me, and you also want more content that I produce, I write semi-frequent essays on the same sorts of topics that I talk about on YouTube as a sort of patron-only thing. So yeah, if you're interested, sign up for that. It helps me a lot. So yeah, thanks for listening.